Good morning. Welcome back. Happy Constitution Day. That's the U.S. Constitution. There's also our constitutions. But I also just heard it's National Voter Registration Day, so we, of course, don't even think about who you might vote for. We just want you to vote. We have a very special treat today. Michael Morand was the first person I called when I got asked to do this project on Yale and slavery, and thank God he kicked in immediately. He made available the unbelievable resources of the Beinecke Library and Sterling and the Yale libraries more generally. Mike is director of community engagement for the Beinecke, which means a lot of roles. He's also the official historian of the city of New Haven, appointed by the mayor. That's an unpaid position, lest you think he took that for lucre. Mike is a 1987 graduate of Yale College and a 1993 graduate of the Yale Divinity School. He's been here and involved with Yale most of his life and knows this place better than almost anyone I know. We just did an event in Charleston, South Carolina over the weekend with the Reverend William Barber, who is now here at the Yale Div School. That's another whole story. It was an amazing event. But without further ado, Mike is going to take us up into the 19th century and especially to the extraordinary story of the 1931 black college that almost was. Michael Morand.
I go to Ghana a lot, and there it is typical to start things by saying all protocols observed. And since we were surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses and so many notable students and neighbors from throughout New Haven, all protocols observed, but I do want to say special thanks to my brother, comrade, the Sterling Professor of History, David W. Blight, for all that he has done, all that we do together, for our conversations, for our conflicts, both of those fuel things, and for the opportunity to be here today. I did want to say a couple things before we get started, but the first I want to say to everybody, and see how awake you are, is good morning. Pretty awake, that's good, I'm glad. Well, at noontime I'll check in and say good afternoon. I also want to encourage all of us in this space and in this moment, in all spaces and moments, to breathe and reflect and center ourselves in this moment, in this space, with these stories. I hope we all know, but I want to name and begin by reminding us that this is not mere academic history. It is history that we hopefully bring the same rigor that we would for any academic discipline, but this is real history of real people and real lives and real pain and real trauma and real resistance and real resilience and real triumph and real setback and real work. And we need to know and name and be with that in this. Each of us brings different realities to this overall reality, but we need to know and name and recognize and support each other. And we also need to always recognize those who came before. Sometimes people have said to Charles Warner Jr., David John Walker and me and the team who did the exhibition Shining Light on Truth, New Haven, Yale, and Slavery at the New Haven Museum, about the book that David and Hope and I and others wrote and edited about the overall work of Yale and slavery. How long has it been going on? In the exhibition, we began work for real October last year. So it was pretty quick. And the book, as you know, began and mentioned in a moment in 2020. But in reality, this history is being written for 300 years. And we need to know and name and recognize all of those people who have come before, including especially recognition that this story lives not only in the formal archives of places like the Whitney Library at the New Haven Museum and at the Beinecke Library, at the State Library. It also lives in the equally legitimate and perhaps even more important archive that is community memory, that people carry with themselves, and particularly in this case, people in black churches in New Haven that go back more than 2 centuries. So to know and name that. And I want to know and name a couple people who are here, one in spirit, but will be here before the session ends. Robert Gibson, who is here and is taking this class, is one of the great community memory workers, and long before I, or long before Hilary Moss, wrote about this 1831 college story and taught about it in the New Haven Public Schools, where he was a great centurion and remains a great New Haven leader. My dear brother David John Walker, who is responsible for the design of the fictive seal of the 1831 college, and my dear brother Tobias Cropper, who will be here before we conclude. So I want to talk a little bit about 2 colleges. Let me go back to the seals. One that was, and one that was thwarted in part by the one that was, the one that is us. I want to talk about shining light on truth and remembering when Yale hid from the truth, and perhaps even when Yale hid the truth. It's been asked here and elsewhere, why do universities do their history? As we shall see, and I think you may know, and we need to name, sometimes universities do their history to preserve their power and to protect their reputations and their brands. In the land of lux et veritas, light and truth, though, can't we hope, must we not seek to do honest history in keeping with our motto and our mission? How can we as an institution expect students to do honest history if we as an institution don't do honest history? How can we expect our society to do honest history if we do not do our own history? If we do not do our own history honestly, how can we expect our students and alumni, say the governor of Florida, a 2001 Yale College history major, how can we expect them to do the hard work of honest history if we ourselves don't do that work beginning as an institution? In the opening issue of The Liberator, January 1st, 1831, William Lloyd Garrison noted, "Knowledge is power. A people generally enlightened cannot be enslaved." Today, we will look to increase our knowledge about power, the power of Yale and the Standing Order of Connecticut it was part of, and how that power was used. We will consider power historic and current with reference to 2 years I noted, 1831 and 2001. I first spoke on the Black College myself when I gave the 181st anniversary sermon at the Dixwell Avenue Congregational Church back on February 18th, 2001. And I want to go back to 2001 and to 1831, to this month and to September 10th, 1831, September 10th, 2001. September 10th, 1831 was a day when Hope Unborn was killed in New Haven. 2001, alas, was a year when Yale chose not to reckon with its role in that history. On the left is the account of the 1831 town meeting that blocked the Black College. On the right is an account of a town meeting in 2001 to reckon with that history. Here's another headline. 2001, November. Yale has been doing its history for a long time, certainly from Thomas Clapp's Annals through dozens and dozens of books since. The question always is, have we done our history honestly and fully? 2001 was, for Yale history, an opportunity lost. We institutionally could have been the first, to do honest history about ties to racial slavery and white supremacy, but Yale chose not to be a prime mover then. And so our formal institutional work now follows paths blazed by Brown, Princeton, Harvard, and dozens of other colleges and universities. 2001 was Yale's tercentennial, 300th anniversary, a time to look back and a time to look forward. The celebrations began literally at Connecticut Hall with a special United States and the United Nations Postal Services commemorations about that building, the oldest standing building in town and on campus. No mention in 2001 was made of who built Connecticut Hall, mention that would await a talk I first gave in 2017 and that we have expanded upon since 2020. That tercentennial was in many ways a time of hagiography, not of history. Just the good parts, not the full history. 3 graduate students challenged Yale to do more honest history and published a report with the local Amistad Committee. They were Anthony Dugdale, J.J. Fuser, and J. Celso de Castro Alves. We need to know them, name them, and honor them. The history of their report is not a hidden history. It was front page news in the New Haven Register. Yale told to admit slave ties. The main trade publication of our field, the Chronicle of Higher Education, said, Yale plays up abolitionist history and ignores its ties to slave trade. The New York Times, the nation's newspaper of record, blared, slave traders in Yale's past fuel debate on restitution. 3 scholars say a university has ignored part of its history. This was a time when the Gray Lady had a print circulation of 1.1 million. You can imagine this got Woodbridge Hall's attention. This YDN cover from December 12, 2001 represents the university's response with pictures of Ezra Stiles and Timothy Dwight framing Professor David Brian Davis. The university questioned the author's motives of the report, derided their credentials, they were not history students, and ignored the report. In reality, the report has stood the test of time well, while the university's response has not. That 2001 graduate student report was rocket fuel for our work now. We could not have done what we have done without what they did then, and we need to honor that labor. Yale's response was a response that universities made, and I don't say this with any negative value judgment, this is not an unimportant thing, but the response was, let's have a conference. A conference was held. Owen Williams, a student at the time, would write later in the book that you see here about the 2001 report and Yale's response. I quote from him, the report claimed that Yale University replied upon slave trading money for fellowships, professorships, and the library endowments. At a conference in 2002, most of the accusations proffered by the report went largely ignored. So our land of lux at Veritas, Williams writes, did not shine light on its truth, but rather obfuscated. Yale institutionally could have been first. We were not. Our students led us. We did not follow. Power trumped knowledge. And it was up to others to lead where Yale feared to go. It was a brilliant scholar and administrator, Ruth Simmons, who led the way. The first black woman to be president of an Ivy League school, Dr. Simmons led the way. Know her, name her, honor her, celebrate her. When she led, Yale was asked, not surprisingly, would it follow? Yale did not. And in fact, Yale said Brown was late. That the 2002 conference had checked that box and done the work that needed to be done. It was meta-obfuscation. The obfuscation was used to obfuscate. But as David said here not long ago, the past will sometimes come to find us when we least expect it. It was the death of 9 beautiful people that roused the conscience of Yale. Their massacre by a white supremacist at Mother Emanuel Church on Calhoun Street in Charleston spurred questions about the name of Calhoun College. And credit to President Salovey and Dean Holloway at the time of raising those questions. The name then was kept, but history was not done coming to find us. History came as Yale dining hall worker Corey Menefee led with a broom. It was a Yale staff member who led. And there's poetic justice that Corey Menefee, a dining hall worker, spoke with a broom. It resonates with the legacies of the so-called sweeps, those men who were the custodians of Yale in the 19th century. Yale workers and New Haven residents led, Yale followed. And after having been kept, a process was established, new protocols were made, advisors were named, and the name was changed to Grace Hopper College. The name was changed then, but history was not done coming to find us. The murder of George Floyd roused the conscience of the nation, including this university. The work that we're doing now dates to that era when Yale committed finally to doing its history fully and honestly. We need to note that it took contemporary Black Death to spur this action. We have to be honest about that fact. It should not have to take that to do this honest history. We also need to be honest about that reality. We need to know that we have come over a way that with tears has been watered, and this work, we have been treading our way through the blood of the recently slaughtered. And so here we are doing this work. This is a copy of an announcement, invitation in 2001, when Charles Warner Jr., David, and I convened a virtual session of Black New Haven community memory workers. Height of the pandemic, so we were meeting virtually. In that session, I asked, as I did everyone, including probably some people in this room, a question that I asked literally everyone I encountered in 2001. Did you know that New Haven could have been home to the nation's first HBCU? No one on the Zoom knew, except for one person who I will close with. It's not surprising. In community memory, this story has not persisted so much because the college never happened. No one says, my great-great-grandfather went there. My aunt told me that used to be. It didn't exist. There is nothing to remember. And in dominant culture memory, you do hagiography. You don't do the bad stories. You look away. Cities and states don't do highway signs that say pizza capital of the world and we killed the first HBCU. It is memory hold by power. So it's up to us to know and recover this story from the remnants, from the memories, from the record. It was a bold proposal in 1831. I hope you've all read the chapter in the book and or seen the documentary film and or read Robert Gibson's and or Hilary Moss and or others, James Brewer Stewart, who've written about this, Lily Todoranova. It was a proposal brought forward by Black leaders in the nation, free Black leaders, and white allies, including a number of key New Haveners, including Simeon Jocelyn. It would have combined practical instruction in the liberal arts and would have been an interesting model, new model of education. It would have focused on individual improvement and community uplift. It would have had 4 trustees who were black, 3 white, a pretty radical move for 1831, and there was a commitment that was begun to be fulfilled for equal amounts of black and white donations. New Haven, as you may have read or seen in the documentary, was chosen according to the sponsors and by their allies at the first annual convention of the Free People of Color because it had a convenient location, close to New York, but not New York, on the highway of the time, the waterways. It had an educated population, so there could be people to teach. It had ties to the West Indies, and as Jamaica and Haiti and other places were liberated, rising numbers of people from there might want to come to college in New Haven as well. And of course, this was a community full of pious, generous, humane Christian people. What could possibly go wrong? The proposal was taken by a group of white allies to the first annual convention of the Free People of Color, endorsed by them. All but one member of the convention voted in favor of doing it in New Haven. And you see some of the names, including Bishop Richard Allen, who was the host, Scipio Augustus of New Haven, John Warner Barber. I won't read them all, but it is important to know, and those of you who are students, whether you're college students or students of lifelong learning, there's much more to know about these people and their stories. New Haven at the time was the 23rd largest city in the country. It was co-capital of Hartford, with Hartford of Connecticut as it was from 1701 and would be till the 1870s. A new state house had just opened in 1831 right behind the Center Church. Connecticut had the highest literacy rate in the nation at almost 100%, 99%. It had the highest college enrollment per capita. Yale was the largest college in the nation, as it had been for a number of years and would be for a number of years. We were players. It was a time of economic growth and intellectual innovation. The Ingersoll House on the upper left, still standing, was built. Steamboat to New York had begun about a decade or two earlier. The Yale Report of Higher Education was issued in 1828. I hope you've read the article, or will, by Lily Todoranova that puts it in conversation with this story. It was a report that continues to have influence and was centered in Yale's tercentennial celebrations and actually republished during that time. Noah Webster and his wife Rebecca Greenleaf Webster, who deserves more credit than she gets on the title page, published his Dictionary of the American English Language in 1828, an imprint of New Haven and New York. And this museum began in that time. John Trumbull committed his paintings, and the construction of the Trumbull Gallery was beginning. It opened in 1832. This is not history that's some distant place. This is here, literally here. In some ways, the call is coming from inside the house. Those were realities in New Haven and Connecticut, and there were other realities. John Brown Russwurm, known to some in this room, should be known to all. Graduate of Bowdoin College, one of the first black men to graduate from a college in America. Russwurm had his great newspaper, Freedom's Journal, and he traveled all around, including to New Haven, met with black and white leaders. Interesting, not laudatory things to say about the aforementioned Noah Webster. And Russwurm notes, quote, "Notwithstanding the fame which Connecticut has acquired in distant lands for intelligence and liberal feelings, in no part of the Union are the people more prejudiced against persons of color." Those of us, I've been in Connecticut for 41 years. Some here have been in Connecticut all your lives and maybe for generations. We're good at myth-making about our 19th and 18th century history. What Russwurm saw and recorded conforms to what William Lloyd Garrison wrote in a letter in 1835, where he called Connecticut the Georgia of New England. And remember always, always, the standing order, capital S, capital O, a real thing in Connecticut and New Haven. Remember always, Yale reflects and reinforces Connecticut in this era. Yale was born of Connecticut, and Yale people ran Connecticut and were the key part of its standing order. In that Connecticut, of its standing order, colonization was the program that the white dominant culture wanted regarding black people, enslaved and free. Their solution to the race problem was to try and force black people to go to Africa. Colonization shows very well that it was quite possible to be anti-slavery and white supremacist. In our hagiographical myth-making history, we oftentimes like to look just at the anti-slavery part, not what went along with it. Hear these words that I will speak from the Colonization of Society of Connecticut, organized and led by men of Yale like Leonard Bacon and Benjamin Silliman and Noah Webster and others. The report issued in New Haven of the Connecticut Colonization Society. There is a broad and impassable line of demarcation between every man who has one drop of African blood in his veins and every other class in the community. The African in this country belongs by birth to the very lowest station in society, and from that station he can never rise. We could think perhaps that those white men should have known better, but don't think that, because they did know better. Everybody knew everybody. Every white person knew lots of black people, and every black person knew lots of white people. They would have known William Grimes, the self-taught man who published his life in 1825. They would have known Jacob Oshun, who publishes in 1817, a New Havener, the first black history that positively identifies with black Africa. They would have known Bias Stanley, who taught himself how to read and write, set up business, and would give $10,000 when he died to the education of people in his race. They knew. But it was that knowledge that fueled their desire to maintain power and to prevent citizenship, of which education is key. Back to what Garrison had said, knowledge is power, and enlightened people can not be enslaved for long. Black people and their abolitionist white allies believed in education and liberation and citizenship, in belonging, in staying here in this country where people were and were from and had sacrificed for, were against colonization. The attitudes were deep and persistent in Connecticut and especially in New Haven. This is a report from 2 decades later, where a black visitor quoted in Garrison's The Liberator reports, and I quote, "New Haven is the headquarters of Connecticut religion, literature, politics, colonization, aristocracy, and Negro hate. One of the most hopelessly pro-slavery places in New England. There is no more abolition in that city than there is in Baltimore." 1851. And again, remember always, this is about Yale as it is about New Haven, because the Venn diagram is rather complete. As William Kingsley would write in 1879 about Yale, from foundation stone to rooftop, Yale College is the growth of the soil of New Haven. So when you read those words from the Liberator, they're about town, they're also about gown, and we know that because we have reports such as this from a Yale student from Virginia, George McPhail, who wrote home in 1834 about the hypocrisy of the North, quoting McPhail, writing back home to Virginia. They talk of ameliorating our colored population when they treat those they have among them with supreme contempt and indignity. The world was watching. And so perhaps it's not a surprise that the idealistic dreams of Creed and Scipio Augustus and Simeon Jocelyn and Arthur Tappan led to a day when Hope Unborn was killed in New Haven. And when in this city, the standing order voted nearly unanimously against a black college. Yale people were a big part of this vote. Again, Connecticut, New Haven, Yale is Yale, New Haven, and Connecticut is New Haven, Connecticut, Yale. And it was a vote that was a clear expression of white power and white supremacy, a vote against black dignity, black humanity, black equality, black citizenship. The context of this vote was a context of power, of blocking one college while building up another college. It's not that they should have known better, they knew. This was not unintentional or merely coincidental. And the calendar shows clearly how this was a time of the same people building up one college while blocking another. Saturday, September 10th, 1831 was the town meeting on the green in the State House behind the Center Church. That day is known in reports from New Haven about this meeting and other reports meteorological of New England as a particularly hot day. People stayed and voted against the college. A few days later, on Tuesday, September 13th, 1831, was the first formal meeting of the Yale alumni to organize the first formal fundraising campaign of Yale, known as the Centimiglia, the $100,000 fund. It is that context where John Trumbull's gallery, picture gallery, comes out of that is now this museum that we're in. Again, this is not some distant history. We're in it, literally. And then the next day, after that alumni meeting, on Wednesday, September 14th, 1831, Yale commencement was held. At the time, commencement was held in September, and it was held in Center Church, as it would be until Battelle Chapel was built later in the century. The same people were at the one meeting, the other meeting, and the commencement. And it said, as you may have read in the book, in newspaper reports at the time, that that commencement was the most crowded ever. And perhaps people had come around because of the town meeting, and certainly everyone would have known. We also know reports of that Sunday of people going to church, not surprisingly, including reports of those who went to the Temple Street Church, now the Dixwell Church, and we can imagine what the conversation was there, less than 2 blocks away from the State House, because that's where Dixwell Church was at the time. Those 700 votes were in favor of a 2-part resolution. A resolution that on the one hand was a clarion call in favor of states' rights. We cannot interfere in our Southern friends' system, cannot disrupt slavery. Education will lead to emancipation. Emancipation will trouble the South. So part was a states' rights, pro-slavery resolution. The other part was that this college, back to what we were just talking about, threatened Yale, Hopkins, and the other secondary schools for white people at the time, and that it would hurt the brand of Yale and the other schools. The white supremacist rhetoric of the time is very clear in newspaper conversations. Fears of quote-unquote amalgamation, of interracial marriage, claims that if this college existed, white people would have to give way on the sidewalk, worries about power literally, as well as the worries about what would happen in the South, and worries that it would draw more black people who were known, air quotes from me, for their viciousness and vice. It was not, you don't have to decode what was being said at the time. This again was of a standing order that was real, a literal capital O, capital S, capital O. The main opponent was David Daggett. How many in this room, show of hands, know the name David Daggett? Needs to be known. Don't celebrate David Daggett, but needs to be known. Yale alum, professor, founder of the law school, was at various times state representative, U.S. senator, judge, mayor. He was the man. After James Hillhouse and after James Hillhouse died, David Daggett was the leader of the Standing Order. A white supremacist throughout his life, he wrote the sketches of the life of Joseph Mountain, the man who was executed on the New Haven Green with an audience of 10,000 people. He was a leader here. He was judge on trial of Prudence Crandall, and in that trial ruled that black people were not citizens. This was not a mere Connecticut ruling. That is a ruling that Chief Justice Taney cited, and cited that it was by a Connecticut guy in the Dred Scott decision. So what happened here was not just here. The world was watching and taking notice. The Standing Order, including people like William Bristol, like Daggett, various different roles, state rep, state senator, alderman, judge, mayor, U.S. attorney, all of the mayors of the time were either on the committee writing those resolutions or speaking in public. Daggett, again, the main leader. The Standing Order, who called the committee, called the resolutions forth, was Dennis Kimberly, Yale alum, variously a general in the militia, state representative, state's attorney, and of course mayor. Simeon Baldwin, part of a major Standing Order family, mayor, congressman, judge. Ralph Isaacs Ingersoll was the congressman at the time. You saw his house, it still exists. State representative, congressman, state's attorney, mayor. The grandson of Ralph Isaacs, one of the major human traffickers of 18th century New Haven. You can see a period room in the New Haven Museum from Ralph Isaacs Ingersoll's house that represents the intergenerational wealth accumulated from trafficking in human bodies and black bodies. Ingersoll's fortune came from that. He would also become ambassador to the court of St. Petersburg of Russia, and showing a certain kind of consistency, he represented the court of Spain against the Amistad rebels. Samuel Hitchcock was, with David Daggett, a founder of the Yale Law School, and variously county court judge, chief judge, and of course at one point, mayor. This was a city action, a Yale action, a state action, a Standing Order action of the dominant ruling elite, which was a very Yale influenced. And it included Augustus Street, a name that may be known to those who live on Old Campus, those who visit this museum, a man who lived a life of leisure and investment, was someone who inherited his fortune from Titus Street, his father, and went to Yale. He was the chief founding funder of what's now the Yale School of Art, the Yale School of Fine Arts, and he is the namesake for Street Hall. Perhaps some of you were in Street Hall earlier today or will be later today. So again, this is not a history that's some far, far away place. It is quite nearby. And it is a history, as I've said, and we need to remember as we think about why it was not remembered after a while, that was very well known in its time. It was covered in national and was covered also in British press. And the coverage was not just about the vote, but about the aftermath, including white mob violence against black residents and white allies like Arthur Tappan, at a time, as some would know and encourage others to look, of white supremacist violence, including in Providence and Cincinnati and other places around the North. It was covered nationally. James Forten, a name that should be known. If you don't know him, note him and find out more. James Forten, one of the great leaders of American history, of the revolution of the 19th century, chief funder of the Liberator and of abolition stuff, an extraordinary leader. Garrison gets a letter from Forten, and Forten knew a lot of things. So this is saying something, that Forten called New Haven's actions, quote, the most discreditable things for a free state that he had ever heard of. New Haven's actions were cheered by the South. David noted we were with Bishop Barber in Charleston, Bishop at the International African American Museum, reflecting on the ubiquity of white supremacy and the standing order of Connecticut, its ties to Yale, all of the things that happened here, looked at the Charlestonian audience and said, you know, maybe the North needs to apologize to the South. And sometimes there's something to think about in that, in the hypocrisy of the received history in our places. But this was known and covered. This is an article from Savannah newspaper that they cheer. New Haven, one from Natchez, Mississippi. You can find them in Richmond and Charleston, all throughout the South. This was known and cited, as it would be cited in Canterbury, Connecticut, in rural northeastern Connecticut, when Prudence Crandall began educating young black women. And they said, why should we have this here if the cosmopolitan elites of New Haven won't do it? And in fact, those two events conspired to lead the state legislature to pass a so-called black law that formally prohibited black people from out of state from coming to school in Connecticut. It was a law written not to prohibit it in that way, but it was a local option law. And those who know Connecticut and zoning will have resonances that you can hear in that kind of local option law. It could only happen if the town permitted it. No town did. Part of the reason why people like James W.C. Pennington and Alexander Crummell could not legally enroll at Yale and had to persist as they did as so-called silent students because of this law that comes directly out of this 1831 story, its aftermath. And all of it helps us understand what the great contemporary scholar Hilary Moss, one of the great authors about American higher education and its racial interconnections and implications, where Moss reminds us, and I think that probably all of us in this room can appreciate even after this 40 minutes, of all the northern states in the antebellum period, Connecticut displayed the greatest hostility to both abolition and African American education. The "and" is doing all the work here. Those two go together intentionally. In a state that had the highest literacy rate, that had the highest percentage of white people going to college, that knew the power of education, this opposition is not an afterthought. It is not a bug. It is the design. And we need to remember that. And again, remember, as I've said throughout, it's not horse or cart. It's both. Connecticut and Yale, Yale and Connecticut. They are part of this standing order. Yale reinforces as well as reflects Connecticut in this era. New Haven then was close-knit. As I said before, everyone knew everyone, effectively. John Warner Barber, who compiled the pamphlet and whose great mark is on the pamphlet, To Be Well Preserved, when he died in the 1870s, 4 decades after this, his obituary pasted into his line diary at the New Haven Museum. His obituary goes on for 3 pages, and it ends by saying the thing he was proudest of was he stood up and raised his hand in favor of the college. And he was one of the, quote, unpopular 4. 4 decades later, that was known. People knew who did what in these times. And geospatially, things were very close. Center Church, the State House, were just 2 blocks from here. Grove Street Cemetery is the home of eternal repose of many of the black leaders who did the work for this college and of the white allies as well as the white opponents. Right next door at the Russell Trust Association is where John Creed, one of the leaders, worked. This is a story that is very close to our current time. And we know that the college was proposed to be at the corner of East and Water Streets underneath what's now the junction of I-91 and I-95, also not far away. So think about how close this is geospatially, and also think about how close it remains in its legacies. In the legacies of intergenerational wealth accumulation, in the legacies of intergenerational wealth disruption, intergenerational education accumulation, intergenerational education disruption. as Mrs. Obama so beautifully put it, the affirmative action of generational wealth, or the opportunity cost of those who didn't have it. And I want to close by thinking about the memory that is an archive, thinking about how history is close to us in the lives of people all around us. My husband, who some in this room know, his great-grandfather was a man named Alfred Powers, born in Connecticut, buried in Middletown, enlisted in the Connecticut 29th. Alfred Powers was one of the great black patriots who fought in the Civil War, fought to save our nation, one of the many black patriots to whom we are all in debt. So Frank's great-grandfather, Alfred Powers, was born in Connecticut in 1845. What if Alfred Powers had been able to go to a black college in New Haven? What would that have meant for him, for his descendants, for our state, and for our nation? I was just in Accra, Ghana, at the burial site of W.E.B. Du Bois and his second wife, Shirley Graham, who studied here at Yale, has a degree from the drama school. Du Bois's grandfather, Alfred, is buried in Grove Street Cemetery. Go see him sometime soon. Alfred Du Bois lived in New Haven in the 1830s and 40s, founder of what's now the St. Luke's Episcopal Church, among other things. What if W.B. Du Bois's grandfather had gone to a black college in New Haven? What if what Du Bois did had been accelerated and moved forward by what would have happened if his grandfather had gone to the black college in New Haven? And my colleagues and I think about this a lot in the instance of Regina Mason, who you saw before, the beautiful great-great-great-granddaughter of William Grimes, buried in Grove Street Cemetery with his wife Clarissa, her father, who was a patriot of the American Revolution. Grimes writes the first fugitive slave narrative. When I mentioned this at that Zoom call that you saw before to community memory workers, it was virtual. So Gina, who lives in Oakland, was on it. She's a New Havener effectively. She has ties here. So she joined. She was the one person who knew this story of the black college. How did she know it? She read it in that graduate student report. She read it in 2003, 2 years after it came out. She tells me she wept when she read the report and had been waiting. When would people do something about this history? She wept because she knows in her body what it means that this college was blocked. Her husband is of a long line of HBCU graduates. She is of a generation where her brother is the first to go to college. She knows what intergenerational wealth and education disruption this means. And think about, for the quants in the room, hopefully we're all quals and quants, think about what this means. It's not a speculative question. And there's some folks at the School of Management, maybe some folks in this room, that will think about how you model what is the opportunity cost of this opportunity lost. What would the present value be if a college had been built in 1831? In our exhibition at the New Haven Museum, we celebrate 224 known black graduates of Yale from the 1830s to 1940. What if there had been 2,240 graduates of an HBCU from New Haven? What would that have meant for New Haven, for Yale, for Connecticut, for the nation, for the world? The numbers here will hopefully stick in some ways when we think about intergenerational wealth, institutional intergenerational wealth, and its accumulation. Howard, great school founded in 1867, is the most prosperous in terms of net assets of an HBCU. $3 billion, pretty amazing. What if there was a $3 billion or more HBCU in New Haven? But then also, as I'm sure you've been doing, look at the differences between HBCUs the 53 independent HBCUs who published 990s, hence the data here. There are obviously many public HBCUs. The 53 HBCUs educate together as many students as the 4 predominantly white institutions, including Yale. You can see the difference between the assets. And so, as you go around Street Hall, walk around the Green, walk around this town where memory is alive and this history is not some distant past, think about what could have been and think about what should be done. Thank you very much.